I didn't even know what I was doing until I woke up in his bed. And by then, it was already too late. He was my boyfriend's best friend. And he was hiding something I didn't understand. Not yet. Hi, my name is Sophie, and I'm 27 years old. This story isn't something I'm proud of. I didn't plan it. I didn't even see it coming. But once it happened, I couldn't unlive it. I couldn't go back. I'm not here to make excuses. I just want to tell the truth about how everything got turned upside down one night, and what came after. I met Nathan when I was 24. We both ended up at this birthday dinner in Camden. Mutual friend, long table, overpriced wine. He was easy to talk to. Smart, but not the kind that talks over you. Confident, but not loud. We exchanged numbers after he offered to walk me to the bus stop. Our first date was 3 days later, and I remember thinking he was someone I could grow into. Not in a fireworks kind of way. More like something steady. Something good. By the time we moved in together, I was 25 and things felt calm. He worked in digital marketing for a fintech startup, all standing desks and Slack messages. I managed a little cafe bookshop on the north side. We sold pastries in the front and hosted poetry nights in the back. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked it. My life had a rhythm. Mornings were early. Nights were quiet. We did the groceries together, argued about dish soap brands, booked Airbnb weekends in Brighton. Normal stuff. Then came Miles. He and Nathan had been best friends since university. I remember Nathan talking about him early on. Miles this, Miles that. Always with this half smile. They met in their first-year dorm. Apparently clicked over a mutual hatred of Freshers Week. Miles worked in publishing. We met maybe a month after Nathan and I started dating. He came over for dinner, bought a bottle of wine that tasted like it cost more than my shoes. He was soft-spoken, polite. Wore these heavy boots even in summer. At first, I didn't pay him much attention. He was just the best friend. Around a lot, but never too much. He'd show up for birthdays, bring obscure board games to dinner parties, recommend books I never got around to reading. But he had this quiet presence, the kind that doesn't ask for space, but somehow takes it anyway. He wasn't the kind of person you noticed right away. More like someone you started seeing when everyone else left the room. The first time we really talked was at a staff night I hosted at the cafe. Nathan couldn't come, late meetings, again, but Miles did. He hung around after most people had left, helping me stack chairs. We ended up sitting on the counter, drinking leftover Prosecco from paper cups, talking about nothing in particular. I told him how exhausted I was all the time, how Nathan had been coming home later and later, how we barely talked without a screen between us. He didn't offer advice, just listened. When I looked at the clock, it was almost 2 a.m. From there, it was small things. Texts here and there. Instagram replies. Quick coffees if he was passing through. It felt harmless. Nathan knew, obviously. He didn't mind. If anything, I think he liked that we got along. Sometimes he'd joke that Miles and I had more in common anyway. I laughed. He wasn't wrong. I didn't think I was slipping. It wasn't that kind of situation. Miles wasn't flirting. I wasn't either. It was just easier. With Nathan, everything had started to feel transactional. Like we were just managing each other. With Miles, there was no expectation, no performance, just breathing room. One night, I was locking up the cafe late. It was raining hard. Sideways rain, the kind that soaks your ankles no matter what shoes you wear. Nathan had canceled dinner again. I didn't feel like going home to an empty flat and another passive-aggressive note on the fridge about soy milk. So I called Miles. He answered on the second ring. "Come over," he said. "I've got pasta and cheap red wine." His place was a walk-up. High ceilings, old wood floors, books stacked against every wall. We ate on the couch. He'd made carbonara. Slightly burned, but good. We talked about nothing important. Work, music, people we'd quietly stopped talking to. There was a quietness between us that didn't need filling. After the second glass of wine, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No swelling music. No sudden declarations. I think it started when our knees touched. Or maybe when I laughed too hard at something dumb he said. I leaned in. He didn't move away. Then it just happened. We kissed. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that pulls something out of you that you didn't know was still alive. I don't remember how we ended up in his bed. I remember heat, breath, the weight of something unspoken finally being said without words. I stayed the night. In the morning, I woke up to sunlight cutting across his floor. He was already up, in the kitchen, making coffee. I sat on the edge of the bed, half-dressed, not sure what to do next. When he walked in with 2 mugs, he didn't say anything at first. Just handed me one. Then he sat beside me and said, calm as anything, "There's something I think you should know." I looked at him. "I'm trans," he said, and the room, everything I thought I knew, turned inside out. I didn't say anything at first. Not because I was shocked. Not because I had some big reaction. I just didn't know what the right response was supposed to be. There was no script for this. No rulebook on what to say when you've just slept with your boyfriend's best friend and he tells you he's trans. So I just sat there, holding the mug, still warm in my hands, and looked at him. "Okay," I said finally. That was all. Not in a dismissive way, just honest. "Okay." He looked relieved. Not overly so, not dramatic, but I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped just slightly. Like he'd been bracing for something worse. He nodded and said, "I figured you should know. I wasn't hiding it. It just never came up." It was true. It hadn't come up. I'd known him for 2 years, maybe more. I'd been in rooms with him more times than I could count. Watched him drink beer, argue about books, help Nathan put up IKEA shelves. Nothing about him ever seemed concealed. And to be honest, it didn't change anything for me in that moment. Not what had happened the night before. Not how I felt waking up in his bed. Not how I looked at him as he stood there in that gray t-shirt, his hair still a bit messy from sleep. It just was. Like everything else in that apartment. Real, present, uncomplicated in a way I didn't know I'd been craving. We didn't talk about it again that morning. I got dressed. He offered me toast. I said no. We didn't kiss. He walked me to the door and said, "You okay?" I nodded. "You?" He nodded back. I walked home in yesterday's clothes and washed my face twice. Nathan wasn't home, thankfully. He'd texted that he'd gone to the gym and then planned to work from a cafe. I sat on the floor of our bathroom for a long time, just staring at the wall. I didn't feel guilty. I know that sounds awful. I thought I would. I thought I should. But I didn't. Not yet. What I felt more than anything was clarity. Like something had cracked open and let fresh air in. Over the next few days, everything looked the same, but felt different. I noticed things I'd tuned out before. The way Nathan answered my questions with half his attention. The way his hand never really touched mine anymore when we walked side by side. I didn't blame him. We'd both been drifting. But now I had a reference point for something else, for what it could feel like when it wasn't so cold. I didn't see Miles again for almost 2 weeks. Not by design. We just didn't text. Didn't talk. Nathan mentioned him once. Something about plans falling through. And I played dumb. I think I was hoping the silence would tell me something. Maybe that it was a one-time mistake. Maybe that it was real. Then came Friday night. Nathan was out. Drinks with colleagues. I was at home alone. I'd made pasta, poured wine, watched half of some French movie I didn't care about. And then, without thinking much about it, I texted Miles. "Hey." He replied in under a minute. "Want company?" I stared at the screen. My heart kicked once, hard, but my fingers moved on their own. "Yeah." He showed up 20 minutes later with ice cream and a bottle of something that claimed to be red wine but tasted like old berries. We sat on the floor, same as last time. Except now we both knew. The line had been crossed. There was no pretending. We didn't talk much. I think we both knew what was happening. When he leaned in this time, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't urgent, not like before. It was slower, more certain. We moved to the couch, then the bedroom. After, we lay there in the dark, my head on his chest, his hand on my arm. I asked softly, "How long have you known?" He looked down at me. That I wanted this? I nodded. A while. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. I knew what he meant. And I knew what it meant that neither of us was pulling away. We didn't talk about Nathan, not directly. There wasn't much point. It was the shadow in the room, sure, but naming it wouldn't have changed what we were doing. What we were already in. I started seeing Miles regularly after that. Quietly. At odd hours. Always at his place, never mine. Sometimes we just talked. Sometimes we didn't. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't write about it. I didn't even say his name out loud, unless I was with Nathan and forced to. Nathan didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but he didn't want to. I started pulling away. He started staying late more. We became good at ignoring each other's absence. One night, he came home early. I was on the phone with Miles. Just talking, nothing risky. But the tone in my voice must have changed. Nathan walked into the room and froze. Who was that? I didn't lie. Miles. There was a pause. Why are you talking to him this late? I shrugged. He needed someone to talk to. Nathan stared at me for a long moment. You two have been weird lately. I didn't say anything. I could feel the moment hanging between us like a held breath. Then he looked away. Whatever, he muttered, and went to the kitchen. I exhaled. That was the night I realized something dangerous. He wasn't going to ask. Even if he suspected, even if he knew in his gut, he didn't want to know. He didn't want to break the surface. And I wasn't ready to stop. After that night, we didn't need to say anything. No, what does this mean? No, what are we doing? We just let it happen, again and again, in the spaces between our real lives. I lived inside a kind of quiet split, a double existence. Mornings at the cafe, evenings with Nathan, and nights with Miles when I could slip away. He never asked for explanations. Never texted, "Where are you?" or "Why haven't you come?" When I showed up, he opened the door. When I didn't, he didn't take it personally. With him, everything was strangely easy. Like I didn't need to try to be liked. I could just exist, unfiltered. I could lie in his bed with my hair a mess and my makeup gone, wearing an oversized hoodie that smelled like him, and nothing needed to be perfect or performative. Sometimes we didn't even have sex. Sometimes we just sat around, ordered cheap food, and talked about weird documentaries or his obsession with secondhand furniture. It wasn't a thing. It didn't have a label. It didn't try to be anything more than what it was. And yet, being there with him felt more real than any of the dinners or silent routines I had with Nathan. The more time I spent with Miles, the more I noticed just how much of my relationship with Nathan had faded. He barely touched me anymore. Barely looked up when I came home. He'd kiss my cheek like it was muscle memory. I stopped initiating anything. So did he. One night, Nathan suggested we spend the weekend at his parents' house. It was the kind of thing we used to do all the time. Lazy breakfasts in their garden, walks in the countryside, pretending we were still a normal couple. But the idea of spending 48 hours in a house full of cheerful family talk and pretending everything was fine made my skin itch. I lied. I told him a coworker called in sick and I had to cover. He didn't argue. He barely reacted. That Friday night, I went to Miles's place unannounced. He opened the door, shirtless, half asleep. He blinked a few times, clearly surprised. "Didn't think I'd see you tonight," he said. I needed to be somewhere that wasn't my life, I replied. He stepped aside and let me in. We didn't talk much. He made me tea. I sat on his couch and pulled my knees to my chest. He sat next to me, one leg folded under the other, just there. You okay? He asked. I shrugged. Not really. He didn't press. Just reached out, gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, and let his hand fall away. It was the most intimacy I'd felt in weeks. It cracked something open. That night, I didn't want sex. I just wanted to sleep next to someone who saw me. Really saw me. And that's what we did. He wrapped an arm around me in bed, and I curled into his chest like I belonged there. Like I'd always belonged there. The next morning, I woke up before him. I watched him sleep. His mouth barely open, breath steady. A tiny scar in his jaw I'd never noticed before. I felt this strange ache in my stomach. Something like fear. Something like want. It wasn't just about sex anymore. It hadn't been for a while. Later that week, everything cracked. I came home from work late, tired, drained. Nathan was sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open, his face unreadable. I went through your messages, he said without looking up. My throat went dry. I wasn't snooping, he added. Your phone buzzed. I saw the preview. Then I saw the name. I didn't speak. I just want to know how long, he said. That's it. I looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in weeks, maybe months. He looked small, fragile, in a way I hadn't seen before. Not angry, just broken. 2 months, I said quietly. He nodded slowly, like he'd already suspected it, but needed confirmation to feel justified. And it's Miles? He asked. Out of all people, I didn't have anything to say to that. He stood up, picked up his keys. I'm gonna go stay at Tom's. I opened my mouth, but he shook his head. Don't. Just don't. And then he left. No shouting, no throwing things, no dramatic confrontation. Just the sound of the front door closing behind him. Final, quiet, crushing. At night, I lay on our bed, my bed now, I guess, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time I'd felt something real in this apartment. I couldn't. I didn't even cry. Miles texted me that evening. You okay? I stared at it for a while before replying. He knows. He's gone. Come over if you need. I'm here. I didn't go that night, not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to sit with the mess I'd made, to own it, to realize that I'd blown up a life, mine, Nathan's, maybe Miles's too, without really thinking about what came next. But deep down, I already knew I'd see him again. That whatever this was, between me and Miles, it hadn't run its course yet. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up early. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been for a long time. I got up, made coffee without turning the lights on, and sat at the kitchen table in Nathan's sweatshirt. It still smelled like his cologne. I didn't know if I should throw it away or keep it. Everything in that place reminded me of a life we had once tried to build. The framed postcards on the hallway wall, the chipped mug he'd had since college, the wine-stained cushion we never replaced. I stared at those things like they belonged to someone else now. A different couple, a version of us that had already expired. By 11 a.m., I texted Miles. Can I come? He replied in less than a minute. Yes, always. His place looked the same as it had the night before. Dim, scattered with books, and unfinished coffee on the windowsill. He opened the door without a word, pulled me into a hug that lasted too long. And I exhaled against his shoulder like I'd been holding my breath for hours. We didn't talk much that day. We ordered food, lay on his couch, and watched a movie neither of us really paid attention to. I fell asleep on his chest. He didn't move. At some point, he pulled a blanket over both of us. By the time the sun set, I'd decided I wasn't going back to the apartment. At least not for a while. Nathan hadn't texted, hadn't called. I didn't know where he was, and I didn't ask. I stayed with Miles for a few days, wore his shirts, took my makeup off in his tiny bathroom, cooked pasta with whatever was in his fridge. It felt domestic, but not in the way it had with Nathan. It wasn't about building something. It was just about being. No one performing, no one pretending. He started leaving a drawer empty for me. Just casually mentioned it one morning while brushing his teeth. I didn't say anything, just nodded and folded a t-shirt into it. That was all the agreement we needed. One night we went out to a bar near his place. It was loud, crowded, full of people I didn't know. We drank too much. He kissed me at the table, openly, like we were just any other couple. It should have felt reckless, but it didn't. It felt normal. Until we ran into someone. Her name was Lucy. Tall, blonde, with the kind of face that makes you remember high school insecurities. She looked from me to Miles, then smiled like she already knew everything. "Hey," she said, with that awful familiarity. "Hey," he replied, a little too stiff. They talked for a minute. I stood there, pretending not to feel the sudden cold air between them. When she left, I asked, "Ex?" He shook his head. Not exactly. I didn't push it, but I remembered the way she looked at him. At me, like she knew something I didn't. We didn't talk about it after that, but the next morning, I caught him texting someone in the kitchen. He put the phone down when I walked in. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just work stuff." I didn't believe him, but I didn't ask again. Over the next few weeks, cracks began to show, small ones. I noticed how often he went out without telling me where. How he sometimes turned his phone face down when it buzzed. How he never asked me anything about my plans, my work, my day. We still slept together, still texted like nothing was wrong. But there was a shift. Something pulling at the edges. One night I found a message on his laptop. It was open on the kitchen counter. A text thread. Not from Lucy. Someone else. A girl named Evie. I didn't read it all, just enough to know it wasn't innocent. I closed the laptop, went to the bathroom, washed my face. When I came out, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at me like he already knew. "You saw it," he said. I nodded. "It wasn't serious," he added. "Is it ever?" He didn't answer. That night, I didn't sleep beside him. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing. I realized I'd walked out of one lie and straight into another. But here's the thing, I didn't leave the next morning. I made coffee. I kissed him. I acted like everything was fine. Not because I forgave him. Not because I didn't care. But because I was too tired to start over again. I stayed with Miles, even after I saw the messages. It wasn't about trust anymore. It was about inertia. About staying in motion because stopping would mean collapsing. I told myself that I didn't care, that he was free to talk to whoever he wanted, that I had no right to claim anything when I'd walked into this from the beginning as a lie. But I did care. Not in the possessive, furious way I'd imagined jealousy would feel. It was quieter than that. Like an ache in the chest that lingered. Like walking barefoot on glass, slowly enough that you don't bleed, just bruise. I started going home during the day. Back to the apartment I hadn't set foot in for weeks. It still smelled faintly like Nathan's cologne, though I knew that would fade. I picked up some of my things, tried to fold clothes into bags while avoiding the framed photo of us on the shelf. His smile still looked real in that picture. I guess back then it was. My phone buzzed. "Miles, coming by later?" I didn't answer right away. That night, I went back to his place, but something had shifted. His hug felt shorter. His attention flickered. During dinner, he kept checking his phone under the table. I didn't ask. I didn't want the answer. 2 nights later, I woke up alone in his bed. He wasn't next to me. The light in the hallway was on. I got up quietly and found him in the living room, sitting on the couch in just his boxers, whispering into his phone. He didn't hear me at first. "I said not tonight," he was saying. I told you I can't. He looked up. I stood there, barefoot, arms crossed over my chest. He ended the call. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I asked, though my voice came out low, too tired to sound angry. He rubbed his face. It's complicated. That's funny, I said. So is this. He didn't try to stop me when I turned and walked back to the bedroom. He didn't follow. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. Made coffee, played music, sat beside me on the couch, and tried to talk about some article he read. I nodded at the right moments, smiled at the right time, but my mind was already gone. That day, I packed my bag. I didn't leave a note. I just slipped out while he was in the shower. I went back to the apartment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the space where Nathan's dresser used to be. The room looked emptier than I remembered, not just of furniture, of meaning. Later that week, Nathan came back. He knocked before entering, like a guest in his own home. I just need to grab the rest of my things, he said. I nodded. He walked past me without looking around. I noticed he had a fresh haircut. He looked lighter, as if the burden of me had lifted. Before leaving, he turned to me. You look tired. Thanks, I said dryly. He gave a small shrug, just saying. I followed him to the door. Nathan, I said before he stepped out. He turned, waited. I'm sorry, I said. He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. I know. And then he was gone again. The silence in the apartment was thicker than before. I spent the next few days alone. No Miles, no Nathan, no one. I didn't go to work, didn't answer calls, just sat with it all. The mess, the decisions, the shame that clung to everything like smoke. Then, out of nowhere, Miles showed up. I opened the door, and there he was, holding a paper bag with pastries and coffee. Peace offering, he said. I didn't step aside. He smiled, uncertain. Look, I fucked up, I know, but I miss you. I miss this. There is no this, I said. He nodded slowly. There could be, if we tried. I stared at him, at the man who had once felt like an escape. Now he just looked like another locked door. I don't want to try anymore, I said. He looked down, shifted the bag in his hands. You don't have to forgive me, he said. Just don't shut the door completely. I didn't answer. He stood there for a few seconds longer, then placed the bag on the ground. Even if you don't eat it, it's still good coffee, he said with a crooked smile. Then he walked away. I stood in the doorway long after he was gone. Eventually, I brought the coffee inside, but I didn't drink it. Days passed, maybe a week. Time started to lose its edges. I'd wake up late, go to sleep even later, forget to eat, scroll through my phone without seeing anything. I didn't reach out to anyone, and no one really reached out to me. People give you space when they sense you're unraveling, sometimes too much space. One afternoon, I decided to clean the apartment. Not just pick up, but really clean. Drawers, closets, corners I hadn't touched in years. I tossed out clothes I hadn't worn since college, old notebooks, expired makeup, a box of cards from birthdays I barely remembered. In the back of the hallway closet, I found a shoebox with photos. Me and Nathan at the lake house. Me at my graduation. A younger version of myself in a too-tight dress, laughing. I sat on the floor and looked through them one by one. It felt like watching someone else's life. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of wine, just one. I sat by the window, legs pulled up under me, staring at the city lights. It was quiet, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't mind it. That's when I heard the buzz of the intercom. I ignored it at first, but then it buzzed again, and again. I got up and pressed the speaker. Hello? It's me, Miles said. Please, just a minute. I hesitated, then buzzed him in. He looked different, tired, unshaven, holding nothing this time. No coffee, no excuses. I've been going crazy, he said the moment I opened the door. You said everything you needed to say, I replied. Maybe, but I didn't mean for it to end like this. I didn't know what he meant by this. We were never really anything with a name. We didn't have a beginning, so how could there be an ending? He stepped inside without waiting for permission. I closed the door behind him, not because I wanted him there, but because I didn't want the neighbors to hear. He sat on the couch, looked at the empty wine glass. You okay? He asked. Fine. That's a lie. I've told worse. He looked down at his hands. I messed it up, I know. You don't have to remind me. I'm not. I kept things from you, he continued. But not because I didn't care. Because I did. Too much, maybe. And it scared the hell out of me. I crossed my arms. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, he admitted. It's just the truth. We sat in silence for a while. The air between us felt thick, like something unspoken was hanging there, waiting to drop. Then he looked at me. Do you want me to leave? I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, I don't know. He nodded. I'll go then, but if you ever want to talk, or yell at me, or anything, I'll be around. He stood up, walked to the door, then paused. I never lied about how I felt when I was with you, he said, even if I lied about everything else. Then he left. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, eyes closed. That night, I didn't sleep. I tossed, turned, replayed every conversation, every glance, every moment that had led us to this weird, broken place. I thought about what it meant to feel wanted but not chosen. What it meant to love someone who didn't know how to hold it without dropping it. A week later, I saw him again. It wasn't planned. I was walking through the park near my old college, earbuds in, lost in a podcast I wasn't listening to. He was sitting on a bench with someone, a woman, younger than me, laughing. He didn't see me, and I didn't stop. I walked past like I didn't know him, like we hadn't shared a bed, like he hadn't once whispered things to me that still echoed when the lights were off. That night, I cried, not because I missed him, but because I missed who I thought he was. There's a difference. Eventually, life started to stretch again. I went back to work. I saw friends. I made small talk with strangers. I even went on a date. Just one. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything. And then, on a rainy Thursday, I saw Nathan again. We were both in line at the grocery store. He looked surprised. I smiled. Hey, I said. Hey, he replied. We didn't hug. Didn't ask how the other had been. Just stood there, awkward and polite. Two people who had once tried to build something and failed. When I reached the checkout, he said, You look better. Thanks. I meant to walk away after that, but instead I turned back. Nathan? Yeah? I'm sorry. Again. He gave a small nod. Me too. That was it. No grand resolution. No promises. Just two people acknowledging the wreckage and leaving it where it lay. When I got home, I put away the groceries, made tea, and sat on the couch with the lights off. It wasn't a happy ending, but it felt like something was ending. And sometimes, that's enough. Spring came early that year. Or maybe it just felt that way, because everything around me had been so cold for so long. The trees outside my window started to bloom, pink and white petals drifting onto the pavement like some quiet apology from nature. I started walking more, alone, no phone in my hand, no destination in mind, just walking. One afternoon, I wandered into a bookstore I used to love back in university. It hadn't changed much. Same narrow aisles, same musty smell of old paper and dust. I browsed without looking for anything in particular and ended up in the poetry section. I used to write poems once, years ago, before Nathan, before Miles, before the version of me that got tangled up in stories with no endings. I sat on the floor and flipped through a book by an author I'd never heard of. A line caught my eye. We are the quiet survivors of our own wars. I don't know why it hit me the way it did, but I closed the book and just sat there for a while, holding it in my lap. No tears. Just that still ache behind the eyes that doesn't go away when you blink. The cashier smiled when I checked out. "That one's good," she said. "Yeah," I murmured. "I think I needed it." That night, I cooked dinner for the first time in weeks. Real dinner. Chopped vegetables, seasoned everything, even used the oven. I ate slowly, in silence, and poured myself a single glass of wine to go with it. Halfway through the meal, I realized I wasn't thinking about either of them. Not Miles, not Nathan. It was strange, and it felt good. Over the next few weeks, I started doing small things for myself. I rearranged the bedroom, bought a new lamp, took a yoga class, though I hated most of it. I got my hair cut, shorter than usual, and when I looked in the mirror afterward, I didn't recognize myself right away. But I didn't hate the reflection either. One Friday night, I went to a friend's birthday dinner. I hadn't seen most of them in months, and for once I didn't feel like explaining where I'd been. I laughed more than I expected to. I even flirted a little, just enough to feel something, not enough to start anything. And then, just when I thought I was done with the past, I got a message. It was from Miles. Not a paragraph, not a confession, just thinking of you. I stared at it for a long time. The old version of me would have answered, would have read too much into it, would have crafted the perfect reply. This version just put the phone down and turned it off. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about choosing peace over chaos, about recognizing what hurt you and not inviting it back in just because it remembered your name. 2 days later, I ran into Nathan again, this time at a coffee shop near the park. He was alone. So was I. "Do you want to sit?" he asked, gesturing to the table beside him. I hesitated, then nodded. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about work, about books, about how expensive everything had gotten. He asked how I was doing, and I told him the truth, that some days were good and some days still sucked. He smiled. "That's honest. Trying to be," I said. There was a pause. "I miss talking to you," he said. "I miss the parts that weren't a lie," I replied. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, just looked at me and nodded. We didn't make plans to see each other again. We didn't promise to keep in touch. But when I left, I felt something had shifted, like a door finally closing without slamming shut. That night, I took a bath and lit a candle I'd been saving for no reason. I let the water go cold around me. I didn't check my phone once. Later, I opened the poetry book again. That same line stared back at me. "We are the quiet survivors of our own wars." And for the first time, I believed I was surviving. A few weeks later, I was invited to an engagement party. It wasn't someone I was particularly close to. A former coworker from the gallery who'd moved to another city but still kept me on the group email list. I almost deleted the invitation. I almost made up an excuse. But then I didn't. Maybe I just wanted to feel like a person again. Dressed up, standing in a room that wasn't mine, surrounded by strangers who didn't know what had unraveled in me months before. So I RSVP'd yes. The party was at a rented loft with exposed brick and fairy lights, full of people who all seemed to belong there in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I wore a black silk dress I hadn't touched in 2 years. I curled my hair. I painted on a version of myself I hadn't seen in the mirror since before Miles, before Nathan, maybe even before that. There was music, small talk, plastic champagne flutes. I stood near the bar, pretending to sip while scanning the crowd for an empty patch of silence I could occupy without explanation. That's when he walked in. I saw him before he saw me, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined him. But no, it was Miles. Hair slicked back, blazer over a black t-shirt, hands shoved into his pockets like he was still too cool to care. He didn't notice me at first. He was talking to someone, laughing at something. Then his eyes scanned the room and landed on mine. We both froze. Then he walked over. "Sophie." "Miles." He looked me over, slow but not crude. "You look..." "Don't say it." He gave a small laugh. Fair enough. I waited. He didn't say anything right away. Just stood beside me, looking out over the party like it was safer to talk without eye contact. I didn't know you'd be here, he said eventually. I almost wasn't. Yeah, same. The music shifted, a slower beat humming under the din of conversation. You look better, he said quietly. So do you. We stood in silence for a while. I've been thinking about you, he said. You told me that already. Right, but I mean it. I didn't answer. I couldn't tell if this was another moment he would ruin just by speaking more. I didn't come here to see you, he added. But now that I have, I don't want to walk away again without saying something. Then say it. He turned toward me, really looked at me. I was scared. When we met, I didn't expect it to mean anything, and then it did. And I kept telling myself not to get pulled in, but I already was. And instead of owning that, I pushed you away. I wasn't ready. I thought I needed more time, more clarity, but what I really needed was you, and I realized that too late. I let the silence stretch, let the words sit where they landed. He didn't reach for me, didn't try to touch my hand or brush hair from my face like a movie scene. He just stood there, raw and still, like he finally understood he had no control over what happened next. You're not the only one who was scared, I said. He looked surprised. I told myself you were a mistake, I continued. That everything we did was just me trying to avoid grief or pain or boredom. But the truth is, I liked who I was when I was with you. And I hated myself for it, because it felt like cheating on a version of me that used to have everything figured out. He swallowed. I liked who I was with you too. I don't know what that means, I said, or if it changes anything. He nodded slowly. Can I see you again? Not tonight. Not like this. Just sometime. I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't see the boy who lied or the man who ran. I saw someone trying. Failing maybe, but trying anyway. Okay, I said. Sometime. He smiled. It was small, careful, earned. We didn't hug, didn't make plans. He just walked back into the crowd, and I turned to face the bar again, my drink still untouched. On the way home, I didn't cry. I didn't replay the conversation 100 different ways. I just sat in the cab, fingers in my lap, watching the city lights blur past the window. Back in my apartment, I peeled off the dress, washed my face, and stood in front of the mirror. There she was, the same girl, a little softer around the edges maybe, a little smarter, a little lonelier, but still there. And for once, she didn't look like she needed saving. The next time I saw him, it was raining. Not one of those cinematic drizzles where everything feels romantic and tragic in just the right way. No. It was a messy, sideways London rain, the kind that soaks your socks through your boots and leaves your hair clinging to your neck. He was standing outside the gallery. I had just finished locking up. My umbrella had flipped inside out twice, and I was fumbling for my keys when I saw him, leaning under the awning like he belonged there. Like it was a movie, and I was supposed to step into the third act. Miles, I said, trying to sound surprised. Maybe I was. Hey, he replied, voice quiet under the rain. I didn't want to text. Why not? He shrugged. Didn't want to give you a reason to say no before I even showed up. I looked at him for a long second. He was soaked, hair flattened, jacket sticking to him. His face softer than I remembered. Not gentler, just more real. Come on, I said. You'll catch something out here. We went to the diner around the corner, the one that still served coffee in chipped mugs and never changed the lighting no matter the time of day. We sat in the back booth near the heater. Neither of us touched the menus. I thought about what you said, I told him, wrapping my hands around the mug. At the party, yeah, I think I needed to hear it. Not just for you, for me too. He nodded. I've thought about that night more times than I probably should. There was a pause. I still don't know what it meant, I admitted. I still don't know if I want to go back. He didn't flinch. I'm not here to ask you to, he said. I don't know, Sophie. I didn't want the last time we talked to be the last time. That's all. The waitress came and left. Neither of us moved. Outside, the rain kept hitting the windows in erratic bursts. You know what's funny? I said finally. After everything, the lies, the guilt, the fallout, I still don't regret it. Any of it. He blinked. You don't? I shook my head. I regret what it cost me, but not what it was. He sat back, watching me like he didn't expect that. And maybe I hadn't expected it either until I said it out loud. You changed something in me, I continued, and I don't mean that in a romantic way. You just forced me to look at myself, at the choices I made, at how numb I'd become. He looked down at his hands. That's a lot to carry. I'm not asking you to carry it, just to know it. He nodded. We talked until the coffee went cold. He didn't ask to come home with me. He didn't reach for my hand. When we stepped back out into the night, he simply walked me to my corner, umbrella forgotten, hands deep in his coat pockets. This is enough, I said as we stopped at the crossing. For now? For now. He nodded again, and for the first time, there was no desperation in it, no unspoken hope. Just understanding. He crossed the street. I watched him disappear into the blur of headlights and wet pavement, and I didn't feel loss. I felt clarity. In the days that followed, I let things settle. I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't hope for texts. I started making plans again, small ones. Lunch with old friends, submitting a short story I'd shelved for years, saying yes to a weekend trip without wondering if I'd need to lie about where I was going. I even started talking to Nathan again, cautiously. It wasn't a reconciliation, not really. Just two people who shared a past, trying to exist in each other's present without hurting more than they already had. We grabbed coffee once. He brought a book I had recommended years ago and said he was finally reading it. I laughed, he smiled, and that was enough. One night, I was sitting in my living room with a blanket over my legs, tea on the table, and the poetry book open again on my lap. I reread the same line for the 20th time. We are the quiet survivors of our own wars. I folded the page, set the book down, and for the first time in months, I thought of myself, not as a woman who'd been betrayed, or who had betrayed, or who had slept with someone she shouldn't have. Just me. Breathing. Still here. The last time I saw Miles, I already knew I wasn't going to see him again. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a farewell. But something about the way he texted that day, short, polite, careful, told me what I needed to know. He was retreating. I could feel it in the silence between his words. In your area. Want to grab coffee? I hadn't seen him in weeks. After everything with Nathan blew up, after the night Miles came over and didn't stay, I thought he'd vanished for good. And maybe he had. Maybe this was a formality, a handshake before the disappearing act. I still said yes. We met at a quiet cafe near the park, one of those places that always smells like cinnamon and burnt espresso. He was already inside, sitting by the window, wearing that same navy coat he always wore when he wasn't trying to impress anyone. Hi, he said, rising slightly from his chair as I walked in. Hey, we didn't hug, we didn't kiss. Just sat across from each other. Two people who had burned down a few lifetimes together, now stirring sugar into lukewarm coffee. I heard about your exhibit, he said after a while. That went well? Yeah, sold 3 pieces. 2 to strangers. He smiled. I'm not surprised. You're good. I looked down at my cup. Thanks. There was a strange stillness between us. Not tense, not uncomfortable, just calm. Like we were both waiting for something neither of us would say first. Then he did. I'm leaving, he said. Barcelona. Teaching program. Starts next month. I nodded, slowly. That's amazing. You think so? Yeah, you've always talked about getting out of London. I guess I didn't think I actually would. I didn't ask if he was going alone. I didn't ask if he'd met someone else. I didn't ask if I had anything to do with his decision. Maybe because I already knew the answers, or maybe because I'd finally stopped needing to know. There was a time when that silence would have killed me, when I would have clawed at him for clarity. But now, it felt okay, like I could let him go without trying to fold myself smaller to fit whatever version of me he might still want. I'm happy for you, I said. His eyes met mine, and for a second, something flickered there. Regret? Nostalgia? A shadow of the boy who used to lie beside me, all sharp angles and quiet breath, memorizing the curve of my spine like it was scripture. I still think about you, he said quietly. I know. And you? I took a long sip of tea, let the warmth sit in my chest before answering. Yeah, I think about you too. We didn't touch. We didn't make promises, just sat there, letting that small truth hang between us like a paper lantern. Briefly lit, beautiful, fragile. When we left, he walked me to the corner. Not the station, not the bus stop, just the corner. One of those boundaries that feels both literal and emotional. Take care of yourself, Sophie. You too. He kissed my cheek, light, platonic, final, and then walked away without looking back. And that was it. In the days that followed, I found myself waking up earlier, not out of excitement or routine, but because my body seemed to understand something had ended. And in that ending, there was space. Room to stretch. Room to begin again. I cleaned out my father's storage unit. There were boxes I hadn't touched since the funeral. Dusty crates of old photographs, concert programs, postcards from places I never knew he'd visited. I found a worn paperback tucked in a shoebox, under a stack of ancient receipts. On the inside cover, in his handwriting, it said, "For Sophie, when the quiet gets too loud." I cried. Not like before, not hysterical, just soft tears, warm and grateful for a man who had loved me in his own quiet way, even when I wasn't sure I deserved it. I started painting again. Nothing fancy, just watercolors on thick paper, usually late at night with a glass of wine and the radio humming something sad and slow. Sometimes I painted women alone in rooms. Sometimes I painted oceans. Once I painted a window with nothing outside of it but fog. I didn't post them, didn't try to sell. They were just for me. For the first time, that was enough. I bumped into Nathan once, at a bookshop. He looked older, tired, but peaceful. We didn't talk long, just a polite hello, a half smile, an update about his sister's wedding. He didn't bring up the past, and neither did I. We had both survived it. That was enough. Sometimes I still thought about Miles, usually late at night, or when I passed a place we'd once been, the pub with the terrible nachos, the hotel bar with the velvet booths, the little Italian place where he first told me he loved me. I wondered if he thought of me too. I never texted. He never called. It was okay. On dot. Months passed. I moved flats. Got a new job managing a small independent gallery. Took a weekend trip to Paris by myself. I started volunteering at a women's center on Thursdays, helping teenagers with creative writing workshops. One of the girls, Lena, wrote a poem about her mother's hands. It was clumsy, raw, beautiful. When she read it out loud, her voice shook. Afterward, she asked if I thought it was too much. I said, "It's honest. That's what matters." She smiled like it was the first kind thing she'd heard all week. I think that's what healing looks like. Not fireworks, not closure. Just gentle moments where you offer someone the softness you never got. I don't tell this story to be forgiven. I don't even tell it to be understood. I tell it because sometimes, when you lose everything, your father, your relationship, your sense of control, you also lose the version of yourself you were never meant to keep. And that's not always a tragedy. Sometimes it's a quiet kind of freedom. Sometimes, on Sunday mornings, I still wake up thinking I'll hear Miles's voice in the kitchen, singing off key, making eggs, complaining about the lack of oat milk. And sometimes, in that half-awake space, I smile, not because I want it back, but because I had it, for a moment, and it mattered. That's all love really is, isn't it? Not permanence, not perfection, just presence. So if you're listening to this, whoever you are, maybe crying into your coffee, maybe staring at your phone, trying not to text someone you shouldn't, let me leave you with this. You're allowed to break. You're allowed to fall apart, to want things you can't explain, to need softness in places where only chaos used to live. You're allowed to make mistakes. Just don't stay buried under them. Stand up, breathe, forgive yourself, and then paint something, plant something, write a poem about your mother's hands. Start again, quietly, if you must. But start.